Hi, I'm Virginia, and I've been a medical writer and content creator since 2020, and I've also been a registered pharmacist in the UK since 2014. I'm the founder of the International Medical Writers Association and Write Clinic, which is a training medical writing academy for healthcare professionals and scientists. And also, I publish Medical Writer magazine twice a year for the medical writing community. So in this video, we're going to go through medical writing skills for beginners. This is a completely free course on YouTube. So section 1, Introduction. So welcome to the Medical Writing Skills for Beginners course. This is a step-by-step guide to writing engaging digital content with real examples from published medical writing, and you will learn the foundations of how to write website content, such as blogs and product pages, promotional content, including getting started with medical copywriting, and social media content, such as Instagram captions. You can use the skills in this course to start creating your own medical writing pieces and put them into a portfolio that you can be proud of. So here's a little bit about me. So my name is Virginia Chachati. I'm a pharmacist from the UK and I now live in Germany because my husband got a job out here. And so I moved with him, but I couldn't work as a pharmacist here. So I had to find alternative work. So that's why I've been working as a freelance medical writer since 2020. I do have experience working as a full-time employee in a medical communications agency and also as an in-house medical copywriter for a health tech company. But unfortunately, I was made redundant twice from both of those jobs. And so since then, I've been working part-time and freelance. And so I've worked with big brands like the NHS and YouTube Health and the WHO and also L'Oreal. So this course is for you if you're interested in medical writing as a career option, you want to learn foundational skills for publishing digital content, you want to confirm that you have the right skills to get started, and you want a non-clinical or a non-patient facing role in the medical field, and you're more creative in your approach to writing rather than technical, but you're also passionate about communicating health topics in a way that is easy to understand. And maybe you want to build a medical writing portfolio, and this is your first taste of medical writing. And maybe you have an academic background, or you're a healthcare professional, or maybe you just have no formal training and you just want to learn more about medical writing and see if you can pick up some skills to get started. So this course might not be for you if you're looking to learn specific technical skills, such as statistics or analyzing data, or how to take that data and put it into a graph, a table, or an infographic. And it's probably not for you if you want to get into regulatory medical writing and produce specific technical documents, such as detail aids or manuscripts or white papers or slide decks. Maybe you've already got a good foundational knowledge of how to write and you want to learn advanced medical writing skills. So this course is really for super beginner medical writers. And also in this course, I'm not going to be teaching you English or specific medical terms, so you need to have a good English foundation. Section 2, briefs and structure. So what is a brief? So a brief is the very first thing that you're going to need to familiarize yourself with as a medical writer. And it is a detailed guide or a checklist of what you need to include in your writing. Usually you might be given a framework, and we'll have a look at an example brief in a second. So it will usually include stuff like this. So who you are writing for, and you might have some examples of specific people in an audience that they want you to write for. So maybe it's a mum that lives alone with her 2 kids at home, or maybe it's a small family, so mum, dad, and a small boy and girl, or maybe it's a teenager, maybe it's a medical student, or maybe it's someone who is a traveler. So they're going to give you a specific person they want you to be writing for. You might also have a specific reading age for your audience. So when we talk about reading age, we're not talking about the age of the person that's going to be reading it. We're talking about the level of understanding that they have. And this is specifically their understanding of English. So there are about 2,000 to 3,000 words in English that almost all people can understand, even if they are still learning English as another language. And I would say that if you can make your writing really easy to understand by a lot of people, then your writing is going to attract a bigger audience as well. So we tend to aim for a reading age of between 8 years old and 11 years old. So that means that most people have finished primary school and they can understand English around that reading age. So the other thing to consider is that when we talk about reading age, we do not want to stop teaching the person who's going to be reading the information. We want to educate them. So you're still going to use the technical words, say, for example, hypertension, and you're going to explain what it is in a way that's easy to understand. So that's high blood pressure. And then you can go a step further and explain what high blood pressure is. You could also use an analogy. So maybe like water pipes, and the water is your blood, the pipes are your blood vessels. And then you can explain that high blood pressure is when you've got the water rushing too fast through the pipe and maybe it starts to damage the pipe. And that's why if you have high blood pressure, it could damage your pipes in your body that are carrying your blood, etc. So you also will have a collection of specific keywords and phrases to include, and this means that your writing is able to be found by people who are looking for it. And this is really important if you're going to be creating digital content. You'll also have some kind of heading structure. So if you're unfamiliar with headings, this is usually when you go to a website and you can see the sections of the article you're reading actually have headings which are different sizes. And so those headings are a type of code that the website can actually read, and then it can understand what's on the page. And then also anyone who cannot read with their eyes, maybe they are reading with a screen reader, they're able to understand the structure information as well. So headings are really important. You'll also need to include sources of information. So where did you get your information? Where is the evidence for what you are writing about? So how can we know that it's actually true? And is your information up to date? So what did you reference? And also anchor text as well. So this will be the writing that you highlight and you include a hyperlink. So that's a link that someone can click on. And you might have some brand specific terms to use as well. So for example, they might want you to say a specific call to action. So what do they want the reader to do? And they might say something like, click here to order now, or maybe click here to book an appointment with your doctor, or click here to make a donation. And then there'll also be tone of voice and style. So do they want you to write in a conversational way, or do they want you to write in a really sympathetic way or empathetic way, or a really professional tone? And of course, they'll give you a call to action as well. And there may be other things around that call to action where they include the specific brand name. So maybe you're writing for a big brand like L'Oreal, for example, like I've written for before. And I would also say that you want to include a date that you actually wrote the information, and also a date that the information will actually be reviewed as well. So here's an example of a brief that I've adapted from one that I received in the past over the years. So they will usually at the very top link to a brand style guide. So that's in dark yellow at the top here. And that brand style guide will tell you how they use bullet points, how they use their call to action, and how they want you to refer to the company name as well. Then at the top, they'll probably give you some general points. So for example, use active voice, such as you can collect your prescription, but not your prescription can be collected. So it's much more direct and it's easier to understand as well. And then at the very top of your page, you're going to have the page title. So what's the name of the product? So in this one, my example is the salbutamol inhaler. And then underneath that title, you're going to have the introduction. So you'll probably want to include a brief introduction about the product. So the name of it, the active ingredient, the dose. So for example, 5 milligrams or 100 milligrams. And then things to note, such as how long it takes to work or what people use it for. So then you've got your first heading. So this is a H2 style, and it's going to be what is the product. So for example, this could be what is salbutamol, or what is a salbutamol inhaler. And then under that heading, you'll want to cover these points in normal text or normal copy, as we like to write. And it will say something like, what is it? So for example, for salbutamol, it's a beta receptor agonist, it's a bronchodilator. What is it for? It's usually used for asthma. And what's a typical brand name? A typical brand name is like Ventolin or Salamol. And then the next heading style might be a subheading for that big heading, which is similar products. And then you could actually tag other products that do the same thing. So there are lots of different types of bronchodilators. And then the page brief will continue to include other heading styles as well. And so it gives you a lot of direction as to what they want you to write. So what does a good structure look like? So you're putting the most important information at the top, and you're making information easier to find by splitting it up using headings. And this means that people can skim the information, so they can go through it quickly and find exactly the information that they want to know. So this saves them a lot of time. And you want to keep that in mind because a lot of people do not do a lot of reading, and so reading can feel like a big effort. And think about this. Would you rather read something, listen to it, or watch a video about it if it was the exact same content? So I think that's why video is becoming more popular now. But of course, you're not going to spend a lot of time and resources creating a video unless you've got a good structure for it, a good script for it, and so on. So when you use headings for digital content, headings have a hierarchy. So you've got the H1 heading, which is the most important. You usually have one of these on the page. And then you'll usually have H2 headings, and under each H2 heading, you'll have like a H3 heading. So the way I like to think about it is if you had a page which was what are the colors of the rainbow, that would be like your H1 or your title. And then your H2s might be the different colors. So you'd have like H2, red is a color of the rainbow. And then another color in another H2 would be orange is a color of the rainbow. And then if you wanted other headings underneath those H2s, so if you're writing under the color red, maybe you could say, what is the color red made from as a H3? Because that means that H3 heading is related to the H2 heading. So you're only talking about the color red in that section, and the same for the other colors. So here's a practice example. So pick a topic you want to write about. So for example, vitamin C, and think about what someone would be searching for if they want to learn about vitamin C. And so the reason that they are searching for is called intent. And maybe their intent is they want to buy some vitamin C and they just want information. So all of these intentions can be reflected in the headings that make up your structure. So for example, your H1 might be the ultimate guide to vitamin C. Then your H2 is what is vitamin C? Then your next H2 might be what are the signs of vitamin C deficiency? So you're helping them learn about vitamin C and then maybe think about if they have any signs of it. And then where can you buy vitamin C? So you're essentially giving them information until they get to a point where they can understand if they need to buy it, and then maybe they'll take action to actually buy it. So what does good structure look like in Google Docs and Microsoft Word? So in Google Doc, you will have a section in the bar that says normal text, and there'll be a little arrow that's a drop-down menu. And so when you click that, it'll actually say styles, and then you've got all the different types of headings there. So you've got title, subtitle, heading 1, heading 2, and heading 3. And you want to make sure that you actually use them in your document. And so here's an example of what that looks like. So you've got the ultimate guide to vitamin C, then you've got that as your title, then you've got your first H2, which is what is vitamin C, and then your next H2 is what are the signs of vitamin C deficiency. And then you might have H3s under that, which explain the different signs of vitamin C deficiency. So for example, how does it affect your gums? You might have bleeding gums. How does it affect your skin, your hair, and your nails, etc.? And then you've got your next H2, which is where can I buy vitamin C? And then you've got your H3s under that, which are related. So you've got supermarket, pharmacy, or online. And then in the top left, you've got a little menu bar, which actually shows you your document outline. So you can see all of your headings there very nice and clearly. So this means you can also jump to different sections. And if you wanted to, you could write a summary for your Google document as well. And I would say that's probably a good place to put your metadata, which is a description of the page that will be a summary of everything you've written on there. And then, of course, you want to fill out all of your sections. So that's where you do all of your writing. Now in Microsoft Word, you've got a bigger section under the normal home tab where you've got styles. So here you've got normal, you've got H1, H2, title, and so on. And again, if we do the exact same process, then you can go to View in the menu bar and then click Navigation pane. So make sure you tick that box or checked that box. And then again, you can have all of those headings in the navigation bar in the same way. So you've got your H1 as Ultimate Guide to Vitamin C, then you've got all of your H2s and H3s under that as well. So now let's talk about headings. So do you need to capitalize your headings? So when it comes to titles or headings, you might see them written in different ways, and this is known as a style. And some brands will pick a specific style where they want you to have the first letter of each word as a capital letter. And the important thing is that you actually are consistent with how you do your headings. So if you are trying to really strengthen a brand and make it more easy to recognize, and so people feel like it's familiar, it's also professional because you've produced a lot of content in the same style, then it feels like they can trust your writing more. And I know it sounds like it's a small thing and a small detail, but it's really important to be consistent across all of your documents and writing for each client that you have. And so some words where you are just joining other words. So for example, in this title, The Ultimate Guide to Vitamin C and Iron, they might not want to have capital letters for the words to and the word and so those might not be capitalized. And so there's also sentence case as well, where the first word is capitalized and other words can be capitalized only if they need to be. So for example, if it's someone's name or if it's the name of a condition that usually has a capital letter, then the other words are not capitalized. So again, just make sure that you know exactly what your client wants, because going back to change it all will take a lot of time and you don't want to be in that situation. So ask at the beginning and make sure it's included in the brief as well. So if you're going to write headings or you have to create them because maybe your client didn't give them to you, then make sure that you include keywords in your headings. And so this does require some knowledge of something called search engine optimization, also known as SEO. And you need to think of each heading as like a step on a staircase. So you want them to get to the top, which is your very main point. So you should only have one H1 and mostly H2s and then some H3 headings. If you have H4 or H5 headings, which are subheadings to the other headings, then that's probably too much information and you might want to create a separate piece of content and then just link it back to that article that you are writing. So section 3, it's the little things. So are headings the same as titles? So to answer this question, we need to talk about metadata. And in the digital world, there are title tags, and these title tags and headings are different. So your H1, which is your main heading, is generally the title at the top of your page. But on an internet search, you will have a title tag which represents the page and your brand. So you can create a unique title tag, and this will all make sense in a second. So if you have this knowledge, it helps you to understand your role as a medical writer as well, and how your content will be found on the front page of the internet, which is the search results page. And this actually might now be an AI search engine as well, as people are using AI as a search engine. So the ideal title for a page is about 7 words or 70 characters. And this seems to be the ideal number because it means that even if you view the title on your phone, it doesn't get cut off. And you might also want to include a number or a question to kind of prompt people to think. And it's short enough to get to the point, but also long enough to fill the space of the title. And you can make your title longer, But again, remember on your mobile phone, you want to avoid words being cut off and then having a ... at the end of the title. And you can use the ... as an advantage though. So if you want to kind of pique people's curiosity, then that can maybe get people to click on your article. So here's an example of what a search page looks like with some actual annotations. So the title tag, for example, here is vitamins and minerals, vitamin C, NHS. So when you actually click on that title tag, that's not going to be the title of the page. It's probably going to be vitamins and minerals, vitamin C at the top, and it won't have the bit that says NHS. So it looks different when you click on the page. The web address is usually directly above the title tag. And then you've got that ... which is the ellipsis at the bottom for this heading by medicalnewstoday.com, which is too long, so it's been cut off at the end. And then you've got the meta description, which is a couple of sentences to explain what the article talks about. So here it says vitamin C is an antioxidant and essential nutrient that has many functions. For example, it helps produce collagen, reduce oxidative stress, and enhance wound ... So I want to know what that ... is, and I would have to click on it to find out. So this metadata is like a hidden description that you provide to allow your content to be found by people searching on the internet or maybe searching on AI. So it's really important that your metadata accurately represents your medical writing. And this means including keywords which are relevant. Otherwise, if you include irrelevant words, then it means that people are going to click on it and they're not going to have a good experience and they're going to go away. And this kind of sends signals to search engines that your page is not relevant to what people are looking for because people are not having a good experience. So your title tag is like your headline and gets straight to the point, which is not the same as your H1. And then your title is normally around 70 characters, as we've said. And then the meta description is usually around 100 characters. And if you're unfamiliar with what a character is either a letter or a space or a punctuation mark. So the letter A and then space would be 2 characters. And the word meta, META, would be 4 characters. So just count the letters, spaces, and pieces of punctuation. Then you've also got alt text, and this is metadata for pictures. So if you ever need to type a description of a picture, then make sure that you actually describe the picture and you're not just putting keywords in there, because keywords do not really work for alt text in that way. So I can't say this is a picture of a person with diabetes because there's no way to actually tell from the picture. But if I said this is a picture of a person wearing a pink jumper and there is an arrow pointing to the person and the word diabetes in a bubble next to the person, that is something that you can visualize and is actually an accurate description of the picture. So long sentences take your breath away, and you may have heard that shorter sentences are easier to read, but if you have too many short sentences together, that can affect the rhythm of the reader. It might sound a little bit robotic. So you want a variety of different lengths of sentences without being monotonous, so sounding the same all the time. And generally, if a sentence is over 40 words and you get out of breath when you read it out loud, then it's probably too long. So I would say a good number of words in a sentence is about 10 to 15 words, and only more in exceptional circumstances. And most of my clients previously have asked that a sentence is less than 20 words for a lower reading age, again, to make the writing more accessible and easier to understand, and also more memorable as well. So by the time you've got to the 10th word in a 20-word sentence, you're probably going to forget a lot of those words by the time you get to the end of the sentence at 20 words. So try to vary your sentences, but also think about what you want them to remember. So it is easier to read a collection of text that has been spaced out, which is why I'm always emphasizing using headings. So really, really avoid writing blocks of text. So try to limit your paragraphs to around 3 to 5 sentences each under each heading if you can. And each paragraph should focus on only one topic and then lead onto the next one in a logical order. So that's the other thing that makes things easier for people to understand. Long words also interrupt your reading. So if you're going to include long words, this can make reading harder as it takes longer to jump between the words and maintain the kind of chain of understanding as you read each sentence. So try to keep most words around 5 letters. I know that can be really difficult, but I would say if your words average out to about 5 letters, then that's totally fine. And I know that if you have long words like hypertension, because you're doing medical and health writing, then that means that your average letter count might be higher than usual, especially depending on the length of document. So don't think about this number too much, but it's nice to have something to aim for. And when you look at a long word, you often have to stop and think about it as well. So make sure that you define them like in the moment, and also avoid just using an acronym for long words, because I've definitely seen things like erectile dysfunction in the first sentence and they abbreviate it to ED, and then the whole article just has ED written out through the whole thing. And I think by the time I get to the end of the article, if I'm not familiar with what ED is, then I'm going to forget. And then I have to go and try and find out what ED was because I've forgotten what it meant. So make sure that you actually include the definition of long words if you're going to abbreviate it quite regularly in your text as well. Now let's talk about your audience and user intent. So your user intent will also affect the structure of what you write. So it's hard to create good structure if your piece of writing does not have a purpose, and the user intent helps you understand the purpose. So a successful piece of writing has a clear purpose and will give the reader what they want to become more aware of your brand or encourage them to take some kind of action. So maybe buying a product, book an appointment, or make a donation, or read another article, for example. Now, in medical writing, you're often solving a problem that the reader has about their health. And so the quicker that you give someone an answer, the more likely that they will trust you, and then they will start to rely on you as a credible source of information and even recommend you or share the page on WhatsApp or something with their family and even recommend you or link back to you. So maybe people use you as a source of information. And this is how you build something called expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, or EAT. And this is something that your writing will be kind of ranked on. And if you have more EAT, then you're more likely to appear higher in search results, or maybe more likely to appear in an AI search engine prompt or request from someone. There is another E to EAT, which is experience. And so this is why a lot of people who write things are going to be trying to find real life people who have either got expertise in that topic or they've got some kind of life experience in that topic. So then they can include that as part of the writing. So here are the different types of intent. So you've got informational, navigational, transactional, and commercial investigation. Now, if someone is having informational intent, then they are searching for information about topics. It's very specific. If someone has navigational intent, then they're searching for a specific website or brand or maybe directions. If someone has transactional intent, then they want to buy something specific. And if someone has commercial investigation intent, then they are researching options for a product. So, for example, apples versus oranges, or moisturizer versus serum, and this kind of thing. So if you want, you can comment down below if you can think of an example for each type of intent. So health is categorized as YMYL, and this is your money or your life content. And this is anything that you write which can affect your readers' health, safety, or financial security. And this makes it high risk content for the search engine like Google, or for maybe the AI search engine as well. So medical writing and health writing fall under this category, as well as finance writing as well. And so this is why it's really important to do your research and write with purpose and be as accurate as possible. There are a collection of blogs like this one that I've linked from SEMrush, which is a search engine optimization tool. There are other search engine optimization tools out there as well. I would say do a bit of research into YMYL content, and you'll see why everybody wants to do health and medical writing, but the quality of content can be really low if people don't do it properly. And this is why it's much easier to actually appear in search engine results if you actually do it properly and you really care about your work. You make that effort to source credible resources and evidence as well. So when you write, you have to know your audience. And so how do you make your ideal person that you're going to be writing for? So it's much easier to write if you know who you are writing for. And so if you make an ideal person or a persona when you write, then it'll be easier to focus on how you speak to them or how you write and how you solve their problems, as you'll have a clearer picture of who they are and what they want and the situation that they are in. So you want to think about their age, their cultural background, their health beliefs, their main problem that you are going to solve for them, and also their ideal solution to the problem. So is your solution actually going to be something that they can do? Because if you're suggesting that they get surgery, which is thousands of pounds, but you know that they are a person coming from a lower socioeconomic background, then maybe that's not a good fit. So your audience is likely to fit a specific category where they have a current situation and an ideal outcome. So, for example, a person with a short-term health problem and wants a quick fix, maybe someone who has thrush and they just want to buy a capsule or a cream that they can use. Maybe there's a person with a long-term health problem and they need a plan. Maybe someone who has type 2 diabetes and they want to avoid getting damage to their vascular system. And then maybe there is someone who is healthy and wants to avoid health problems. So maybe someone who feels like they have put on weight and they do not want to become overweight. Maybe they want to avoid getting diabetes because there's a history of that in their family. Maybe there's a person looking to help a family or a friend, a family member or someone who is a friend and wants a good deal as they're on a budget. So maybe there are people who want to treat their friend to some kind of health gift and maybe getting like a gift voucher for the dentist or something like that. And maybe a person who's tried a lot of options and wants a better, more premium service, or they are willing to invest in something where they feel like they're going to get more expertise. And they might actually be a doctor or a fellow healthcare professional who's looking for information that they can trust and actually share with a patient. So think about who you're creating your writing for and what is going to benefit the reader. So tone of voice is very important, but what does it actually mean? So you want to be able to attract your audience with your tone of voice, and your audience will have a health need when it comes to medical writing. So think about how they will feel when they read your words. So an aggressive tone might sound something like, "You're never going to get better unless you try this." And so if you were to read that, that's probably not something that's very comforting or empathetic or very understanding of their situation. So it might be better to go for a more positive and an encouraging tone of voice, something like this. You can consider trying this option and see if it can help you on your journey to better health. We're here with you to support you and answer any questions you have along the way. Now, there was a study done by the NN Group where they try to categorize different types of tones of voice. And so there are 4 different scales, and a tone of voice is measured by whichever scale you are looking at. So, for example, the first scale is funny, neutral, or serious. The second scale is casual, neutral, or formal. The third scale is irreverent, neutral, or respectful. And the last one is enthusiastic, neutral, and matter of fact. So if you had something which was everything on the right-hand side of the scale, which is serious, formal, respectful, and matter of fact, you might say something like, you need to see your doctor on the 2nd of February 2026. And if someone was serious but a bit casual but still respectful but enthusiastic, they might say something like, you're going to need to see your doctor on the 2nd of February 2026, and they're looking forward to seeing you. So I'm a bit more casual, but I'm also enthusiastic. And I think that, depending on the style of writing that you need to create when you're writing for a client, you should always ask for examples if possible, or previous pieces of writing that they can show you so you can mimic that style. So here's an example exercise. So think about who you want to communicate with and make a copy of these questions so you can answer them before you start writing. So what is their age range? So maybe you are trying to help people between 20 and 40 years old. What are they having trouble with? Maybe they're trying to choose a type of contraception. Why do they have this problem? Because there's a lot of advice online and they're not really sure who to trust. And then how can you help them? So write about the advantages, the disadvantages of each type of contraception using reputable medical sources. And then what action do you want them to take? So do you want them to book an appointment through your online doctor's service or fill out an online questionnaire to buy a contraceptive product? Now, if you want, you can go the extra mile and actually speak to people. So we call this user testing or user research. And to really get to know your audience, you can take a survey, for example, maybe like a Google form. You can email it to them. And obviously you want to get their consent to use their responses and any writing that they send you. And it will really help guide you in your writing, because also you will get to address maybe some misconceptions or maybe information that they have previously received that may not be correct. And I think there's a lot of that on social media right now, because we have so much access to information, but sometimes that information is not accurate or credible. And so that's where you step in. So the other thing you could do is speak to a medical expert in that field as well. So maybe you could speak to a gynecologist if it's concerning women's health, for example. And you could also speak to someone who has written about your topic before. So maybe if you're working in a team, you can speak to them about what their sources of information are. And you can ask your client as well who they've contacted in the past. Or if your client has done user research before, then you must get access to that. And I've been in a situation where I've had to ask my client about that. And it's also great to connect and build relationships with people, because you never know where it could lead. Maybe you need to reach out to them again in future. And I think this is kind of a relationship that journalists build with people. So they'll probably have their go-to doctor or pharmacist that they speak to on specific topics. And so life is really about how you can support one another and also learn about how to grow together so that everyone can benefit. So getting people's real experiences and then trying to use that in your writing, then you've ticked that box of experience and expertise and authority and trust. So if you're going to write something, should you use I, you, we, or they? So should you use first person, second person, or third person? So first person is I and we, second person is you, and third person is he, she, or they. And so to increase engagement, it's often preferred by clients that you speak in second person. So you're always saying, you should do this, you should do that. And then you should also think about using second person because it's friendly and talks directly to the reader. And it's also conversational. So if you're going to use I or we, then that does sound like a strong authority. It's a little bit detached. And I think that when people start talking about themselves, it's less engaging. So people are less likely to actually interact with your writing. And this might be useful in some situations where maybe you're describing the values of a company. But I would also say that if you're going to use the word you do not want to use it in a way where you're accusing the person of something. So you also don't want to couple them with their health condition, which may not be very empathetic. So, for example, you would not say to help your cancer get better. You might say to help you get better and help you recover from cancer might be more gentle, because your cancer makes it sound like it was their fault that they got the cancer. And so you need to be kind of mindful as to how you use the word you, especially in health and medical context. So now we're going to talk about little things, and I call this section the nitty-gritty. And so if you are using bullet points, these are pieces of key information that you want the readers to know. And you should always use bullet points if your sentences get unwieldy. So this means that your sentences are becoming too long or you're using lots of commas. And bullet points also make the writing much easier to read and you can skim over them quite easily. But try to avoid making your points on your bullet points too long unless they're a list of instructions. So, for example, if you're going to tell someone how to do something, then use numbers as bullet points. So the first thing they do would be number 1, the second thing they do would be number 2, and so on. And if you are just using dots, then you are simply listing things in no particular order, and that can be a bit more less kind of instructional and more kind of open to people deciding which bullet point is important to them. Bullet points are also easier to remember compared to paragraphs. And I would say try to avoid using too many bullet points. And if you do need to use a lot of bullet points, try to make them as short as possible. So, for example, if I am writing a list of side effects, then I want to try and keep those bullet points as short as possible. Otherwise, that can get really overwhelming. So how often do you use punctuation when you text a friend or a family member? Probably not that much, unless you're writing words like I'm and you need to use the apostrophe between the I and the M. And you probably just use an exclamation point or a question mark sometimes, and maybe a comma, maybe a full stop. But when you are writing, you want to avoid using too many semicolons, colons, and single or double quotation marks or ellipsis, or even unfamiliar characters, such as all of these different types of brackets or hashtags or the @ symbol or the greater than or less than symbol. And you also want to try and use the correct dash if you can. But if you can avoid using a dash, that would be even better, because again, it can interrupt reading. And you can read about dashes and other types of punctuation on grammarly.com. And I would say try to limit how much punctuation you use, again, because they might be unfamiliar and you want people to read and remember what you've written. When you are writing, try to use analogies. So sometimes in medical writing, you need to describe something from a point of familiarity. And this is really important because a lot of things in health and medical writing can be quite difficult to understand. And so you want to start with something that people know or are likely to know. And then you can then use that familiarity to explain something, but also make that thing memorable as well, because they'll remember how you described it and what familiar thing you used to explain it. So, for example, if you want to describe bariatric surgery for weight loss, it might be visually appealing for a person to imagine the process in their head by describing it as like a balloon that's been inflated, and then that is your stomach, and then a piece of it being tied up to make it smaller, maybe at the top, or maybe a piece of it being cut away to make it smaller as well. And this helps a person better understand what you're talking about, and then also more confident to make a decision on their own. So remember that when you're trying to learn something new, you're a little bit like a child. And when you're stressed due to a health problem or concern, you might find it more difficult to actually understand a complex explanation. So try and keep it as simple as possible, and also try to make sure that the person is going to feel informed. So in health and medical care, we're always talking about helping people make an informed decision. And this is what that means. So they understand what's going to happen and they feel like they are making the choice rather than us telling them what to do. So when you are writing, try not to include too much detail down to very fine descriptions or microscopic pieces of information, because this can overwhelm the reader. So it's better to be clear rather than complicated, and try to think about the situation that the audience is in as well. So if it's a really urgent situation or it's a really short-term problem, such as emergency contraception, then you're more likely to want a quick solution. So you're going to skip the detail and just get straight to the point. But if you want to think long and hard about a big investment, such as like an expensive surgery, maybe you've had back pain for 10 years and now you're thinking, actually, I want to consider maybe stem cell therapy because I really want to, reduce this pain in my back and I want to avoid taking even stronger painkillers because it's just getting worse and worse. And so this can really help someone if you're going to include lots of detail, because it's an expensive thing that they need to consider getting, and also they want to really understand and feel informed about the side effects of something like a stem cell treatment. So use your audience persona to guide you as well. So think about their budget, think about the urgency, and think about what their situation is as well. So when you're going to be brief and concise, then you can follow these 3 steps as a guide. So especially in a world of social media where everything feels like it's catchy and quick, there are still things like this course, for example, where you want to be a bit more detailed and you're actually teaching someone something. So I can't teach you medical writing in 2 minutes. You do actually need to spend time thinking about all these little things, and you need to practice them as well, because you're learning a skill that you're going to get better at over time. And you might want to choose medical writing as your new career. So you're going to have to get comfortable with all of these new words and skills and how to do things. So I would recommend using something like a hook to attract the reader's attention at the very beginning of your writing if you want to write something brief and concise. This could be an enticing headline, a question, or a thought that they might be thinking. So, for example, I will usually start a post like, do you want to become a medical writer? ? And if the answer is yes, then most people will continue reading. And sometimes you might want to give some top tips. So maybe you can say, here are 3 things you need to become a medical writer. And again, if someone's interested in that, they now know what to expect. So I'm going to give them 3 points. It's going to help them become a medical writer. So you also need to think about providing value, and value is a word that gets thrown around a lot. And what it means is you're providing helpful information, or it's some kind of entertainment or some kind of inspiration to do something or learn about something. And so I would try to be quite careful if you're going to use humor in medical writing. So I know that the NHS in the UK, for example, has been experimenting on Instagram with using memes. And if you're unfamiliar with what a meme is, it's usually a kind of image which has a certain piece of culture attached to it. And then people use that image to convey some kind of emotion or reaction to something. And so an example of a meme might be when, for example, David Beckham asked his wife, Victoria Beckham, about the Rolls-Royce car that she used to go to school in. And he was telling her to be honest and things like that. So people use that framework to describe other things as well, which has a similar kind of familiar meaning or emotional reaction. So think about how you are going to provide that value. So finally, have an endpoint or a call to action. We call this a CTA. And what do you actually want the reader to do? So you've got them to read all of this information. They found it really helpful. They've got all the way to the end. Do you want them to read an article, go to a website, or sign up to something, maybe like a free webinar, or book an appointment, or make a donation? So think about exactly what the goals are, and your client or whoever you're writing for will usually tell you this, hopefully in the brief. And so then you'll be able to wrap that up at the end. Now, when you write, think about plain English. And so word plain does make it sound boring, but that's not what I mean. I kind of mean international English. So international English is less effort and it's also easier to read. And this means that you can get your message across in a way that people will be able to understand and also remember as well. And it makes people take action as well. So it gives people a sense of relief that they don't need to go and look up a long word as well, because you've done the hard work for them and included everything that they need to know. So again, it's about giving them enough information. So thinking about that level of detail or being brief and concise, depending on the situation. And also it will keep them reading as well. It also demonstrates that you know what you are talking about because you're giving them, again, just enough information. And there's no better way to get someone to trust you than explaining things in simple terms and also getting straight to the point. Because I think that if you speak with someone who has to kind of go around the question rather than answering it directly, it's really hard to think that they actually know what they're talking about, but also if they know the answer. So try to stick to what I call the parameters. So this is something like either the word count or the character count. And if you get a character count, then ask if it includes spaces or if it's without the spaces. And this will definitely affect how much you can actually write. But I would say write without that in mind to start off with, and then think about if you need to include extra words or if you can cut it back. It's much easier to write a lot about something and then cut it back rather than just try and write a little bit, because maybe you won't have all the information that you need to include. So a good example of this is social media captions. So caption is usually like a description of something that's attached to either a video or an image, and it will usually be separate. And so these can usually be quite short, so maybe 200 characters or less, or sometimes it can be 2000. So I think it's about 2000 for LinkedIn. And sometimes it can be really restricted. So when we go back to thinking about how long your title should be, that would be 70 characters. So try to get your message across in as few words as possible if you can, but that does take practice, but also it is a skill worth developing. And know what the limits are definitely from your client and be sure to meet them. So usually when people call me and they're like, can you write a blog? It's 900 words. How much is it? And I will give them a number, and it will usually be a few £100. And then they'll say, okay, not quite looking for that. But I will be able to justify why I charge that much, because I will have all of this detail, especially looking at their brief, and help them to actually pin down what they want to achieve with this piece of content or this piece of writing that I'm going to write for them. So I'm going to be working on it with them. Now, if you'd like, you can do an Instagram post caption, so to practice your writing. So use this HO framework that I've created, which is H for hook. So what's your headline? What's the first line you're going to write at the top of your caption to actually grab people's attention? And then 1, which is for O. What's the one point you're trying to make? What's the key takeaway you want people to remember? Value. So how are you providing value? Are you educating them by providing information? Are you inspiring them with maybe a story? Are you providing entertainment by telling a funny joke or something like that? And then the E is for end point. So what do you want them to do at the end? What's your call to action? Are you trying to get them to book an appointment, or maybe make a donation, or read something else, or contact you, or sign up for a webinar, etc.? So write an Instagram caption to go with this image on the left, which would be a post about vitamin C. Or if you don't want to write about vitamin C, then you can write about something else. And I look forward to your responses in the comments. So now it's time to write. So easy reading is hard writing. So why does it take so long to write anything? You need to think about everything you are doing and how it will be received by the reader, so your audience. Now, the real writing happens when you start to edit. So that's why I always recommend that you try and get your first draft, your first piece of writing, the first version done as quickly as possible. And then you try and get feedback as quickly as possible as well to know that you're on the right track. And then try to do a little at a time in terms of working on the feedback so that you're actually processing it, you're improving your writing, and you're meeting the needs of the person that you are writing for. So this is your client. And then also you're making sure that you are balancing that with what the reader is going to need from your writing as well. You can also write in any order. So I recommend you just get started. So you don't need to start with the introduction, because actually usually I leave the introduction and the ending at the end because I need to write what's in the middle. And once you know what the core of your writing is, then you can write an introduction to introduce it, and you can also summarize it at the end as well. So worry about the organization and flow of your writing later. Now, I touched on reading age earlier, and the reading age of someone who is under a lot of stress is going to be much lower than their normal reading age. So, for example, if you have someone who has a master's degree or a PhD and they suddenly feel unwell, they might find it difficult to focus or understand things. So you want to try and make things easy to understand regardless of their kind of educational background. So, for example, someone who needs an emergency medicine will want quick information and a short amount of time to get what they want as well. So, a short piece of writing. If you're writing in plain English or international English with short words and sentences, with less detail and in simple terms, this all makes the reading age of the piece of writing lower. And when you start to include more detail and longer words and sentences or use technical terms, then you're increasing the reading age. You can actually check the reading age of your writing by using a tool which is online. It's a website. It's called Hemingway app. And you can copy and paste your writing into it, and then you can edit it on there. But I would say be careful because it doesn't save your writing. So if you're going to be using that, just use a few sections of your writing at a time. Don't copy and paste the whole piece of writing into the website and then spend ages editing it on the website. And then if something happens, you've lost all your work. So go section by section. Now, sometimes there will be specific brand terms that you need to use, and this will be for consistency with their other pieces of writing, depending on your client. These are usually established terms which come across as professional and genuine, and it's part of their identity. Again, it's really important that they use this across all of their communications channels, such as emails or social media, like the website, or even the receipts that they print. So, for example, imagine if this brand called Boots the Chemist wrote Boots with a small b, or wrote Boots in all capital letters, instead of Boots with a big B and a small OOTS. That might look a bit odd, and you might be a little bit suspicious because you're so used to seeing it in a specific way. And so that might mean that you lose a bit of faith in who they say they are or the communications you receive from them. So with multiple brands, sometimes clients may refer to them as their sister company or our partners. And if you're not sure, then find out from your client before you start writing. Now, if you want to get your reader to take action, then medical writing often involves gathering all the facts from reputable and credible sources and presenting them to a particular audience. Now, when it comes to getting your reader to take action, medical writing transforms into medical copywriting, which is what I do. And this means that your purpose has gone from stating facts to promoting something. And again, this means you're more likely to use a call to action or CTA to urge your reader to do something. Now, this, as I mentioned before, is often like signing up to a newsletter to stay informed of upcoming events, or simply regular information on a topic of choice, such as women's health, pet healthcare, or dental care. So as a medical writer, you need to think about inclusivity and diversity and accessibility as well. So keep in mind that a person is not their condition. And if you can, ask them directly how they want you to describe them or how they would describe themselves. So the easiest way to do this is to either find people who are the audience you're trying to write for, or you can actually go to a charity organization or a nonprofit organization or another company that actually serves the audience that you are writing for and ask them directly, what kind of language do you use? And you may need to pay to find out this information, or you might need to create a user group so that you can test your writing with those people. And this is worth doing because a lot of people do not do this for the writing that they produce. And this means that you're going to spend all that time writing and you're not going to reach the audience. You're not going to be able to communicate with them or get your message across so that they actually take the action that you want them to take. And that might be really important for something like getting a vaccine to help stop the spread of disease. So modern medical writing has moved away from language such as your diabetes or as a diabetic or an addict's brain. And you should avoid identifying people by their condition. So you would say diabetes can cause, or a person with diabetes, ... or the brain of a person recovering from addiction. And as I mentioned before, a sensitive topic such as cancer or a terminal illness, you'd use the phrase the cancer rather than saying your cancer. And this helps to detach the condition or the situation from the person as a separate entity. So try to think about changing your tone so it's more respectful and friendly and not accusatory. When you have gender-specific topics, there is a trend towards using they or people or person instead of his or her or women or men. And I would say try to avoid any bias or prejudice towards specific ethnic groups, races, or genders in your writing, or include a definition or reason why you had to identify people in a certain way. So sometimes you might hear people say things like women or people born with a womb, if they are talking about maybe womb cancer, and maybe female hormones like estrogen. So think about how you want to be more inclusive in your writing. And you also need to identify and declare any limitations or lack of evidence in the data or information that you use for your writing. So if you know that maybe a certain ethnic group or a certain community of people in a specific location was used for a study, then that should be something that you should declare early on in your writing, because that means your writing may or may not be relevant to the person that's reading it or using your information as a source of piece of information to help make a health decision. So accessibility is also another thing to consider. So the words that you use and how you structure your writing is super important. And I've been through that earlier in the course as well. So there may be some trigger words that you want to avoid depending on the context. And we want to avoid using what I call being sensational. So if you say something is the best or something cures something, then it actually has to be that thing, the way that you've described it. Otherwise, you are misleading the reader. And sometimes people do not want you to describe what they're feeling. For example, if you say they are suffering, maybe suffering is a word that we should reserve for when people are really and truly suffering. And if you say something like suffering from hay fever, there's a scale, as you know, in healthcare. There's a lot of nuance behind things. So some people might have really mild hay fever and some people might have really quite strong symptoms of hay fever. And so they would be the ones that would feel it's appropriate to say suffering. And think about the word serious as well. So if you say something like a serious side effect, then try to give that some substance behind it. So you could say serious side effects are rare, but actually that makes me really worried because now I know that serious side effects are possible. And you want to think about using numbers to define side effects instead. So if you say people are struggling, some people might feel like that's a form of misrepresentation as well. So are you struggling with your period pains, or are you experiencing period pains? How can we help you to feel better? And think about the word disorder as well. So should you describe it as a disorder, or is it a condition that you have? And also things like the word death or kill, that can be really quite sensitive to some people, and I would consider the context as well of why you might use those words and if they're appropriate. And again, if you are unsure about any trigger words, definitely use a test. So that means asking real people what they think of you using that word in your writing or to communicate your message. Another thing you might want to consider is using specific words with a certain context, such as diet, in a piece of writing where people might have eating habits that affect their health. So we want to avoid calling them disorders, and people who hear the word diet might not think the daily food that you eat every day, so your daily diet. They might think of the word diet where you are trying to maybe reduce calories or cut out certain foods because you want to lose weight, and that can lead to health conditions like anorexia, for example. But as we know, that can be mostly a mental health condition. So think about words that might trigger people and their condition. So these words are trigger words because they can evoke an emotion or feeling that you may want to avoid, and you might disconnect with the reader and they might go somewhere else because they don't feel comfortable reading your writing. So when we are writing medical content, there might be words that we use all the time that might actually be hard for people to understand, and you need to explain those words. So these are words like risk. So what does that actually mean? So I like to avoid using the word risk, and instead I say something like, the chance of you getting this, or it increases your chances or decreases your chances, or it might be harmful if. So try to think about different words you can use, or if you use the word risk, then explain what it means. There are also things like consequences. So what does that mean? Consequences sounds like a bad thing. Like, why did I do something and now have to face the consequences? Also things like symptoms. So I like to say, what does it look like, or what does it feel like? And diagnosis or prognosis. So a lot of people, again, will feel unfamiliar with a diagnosis. Essentially is when we are trying to figure out what the problem is. And so it's a working diagnosis most of the time. So we're going through possibilities of what could be happening. So maybe it's a bacterial infection, maybe it's a viral infection. We're not quite sure until we get the tests back from the lab, for example, and the test results from the lab. And then there's also prognosis. So what's the kind of long-term view? What happens after you have treatment? For example, if you have treatment for cancer, then, how long is that treatment going to last? Or what are the chances of the cancer coming back? Another word is characteristics. So that's a very long word, first of all. And second of all, a lot of people are not going to understand what that means. So if you say, this disease is characterized by, or one of the characteristics of this disease is, it's very difficult to understand. So try to use something different, like you can tell if it's this disease because this, and this, for example. So as a medical writer, it is your duty to explain words that are hard to understand for a public or patient audience. And we also have a word called jargon in English, which is a collection of words specifically used by people in a certain field, and we want to avoid it. So sometimes it can be difficult if you know a lot of medical words, but you cannot see how those words appear to other people who are not familiar. So that's why user testing is important. And healthcare professionals will also always appreciate that people are at different stages of their learning. So what I mean by this is that when you are very new to a health topic, So, for example, it's the first time you're learning about diabetes. Maybe you're really young. And I think we tend to forget that people don't know everything at the same time in their life. Some people might only learn about condition, maybe in their 40s or 50s, and some people might learn about it in their 20s. So it's really important to not assume people's knowledge as well. And people are at different stages of learning about certain things. So try and get out of your medical writing expertise bubble and think about what a person does not know and try and give them that information preemptively, so before they even need to look for it. So when you're writing in an accessible way, another thing is format. And so if you're going to use italics or italics, however you want to say it, this can be hard to read, and it makes the reader think, why is it written differently? And you want to save this maybe for Latin names, such as taxonomical names like Clostridium difficile, which is the name of a bacteria. And I would recommend that you can avoid italics altogether if you can, and avoid Latin terms if you can as well, unless you definitely need to include it in the writing. And then the next thing is bold writing. So bold writing can be used when you want to emphasize something or make it stand out, or to highlight something important on the page. But if you use it too much, then it's going to make the writing look really difficult to read. If you are underlining anything, this should only be for links to other pages on the internet. So try to avoid underlining things. Now, I know some people will use bold to make a heading, but you should not do that. You should use the H1, H2, H3 structures. And if you are underlining, you should not use underlining for headings either. So you should never hyperlink or add a link so that someone can click a heading. And capital letters. So if you use capital letters, unless it's part of a brand guideline, maybe their whole brand name is in capital letters, then these can look like you are shouting or sound like you are shouting. So when people read the information in their head, it might look like you are expressing it maybe in an aggressive way or loudly. And they also look a bit abrupt as well. So they look out of place. And similarly, italics can look like you're whispering. So try to avoid these formatting types in your writing. So I just wanted to include a few more things. And so if you are writing links into your piece of text, then you want to use anchor text, which is the collection of words that you highlight and you use to link to a website, because then it's going to be underlined. So an in-link is a link to a page that is on the same website, and an outlink is a link that goes to another website, maybe in a different domain. So for accessibility and good internet practice, you want to use a collection of words, which is your anchor text, that accurately describes the link destination. So it's much easier to click a collection of words rather than just a single word, like click here. So sometimes people will just highlight the word here, and it's really hard to do that, especially if you're on a small screen like a mobile phone. And it's much harder to do that if you've got a lot of text on screen on desktop or on a laptop. So try to use a collection of words. I would say at least 3 or more words. So for example, if I'm reading about a condition such as acne and the paragraph mentions acne treatment, I might be interested to click on the words, acne treatment for teenagers, for example, to learn more about acne treatment. And so as a writer, I would highlight those words, and then link them to a relevant web page, whether that's on the same website or on a different website, a different domain. And then you should avoid linking too much as well, because you want a good balance of original content that you have created on the page and links to other pages. So you don't want to link every single sentence that you write, because that can make it really difficult to read as well. So use this sparingly if possible. And also, if you use words that are not relevant or they don't actually describe the destination, people are less likely to click on it. So if you say, you can find out acne treatments here, and you just highlight the word here, people are probably going to miss it, and then they're not going to click on it because they're not actually sure where it goes, even though it says the word here. So when you link your anchor text, then make sure that it goes to somewhere relevant. So do not clickbait people either. So if you say, go here for acne treatment for teenagers, and somebody clicks on it and it takes you to acne treatment for people in their 40s and 50s, then that's not a great user experience for the person who is using your information, for the reader. So just keep that in mind. And people who use screen readers will also read out the word, and then it will read out the link that it goes to. So make sure that your anchor text is relevant to the link. So I also want to mention contractions. So contractions are shortened words that have an apostrophe, which is a little kind of comma, but it's in the air, if you like, of a word. And this is something, for example, such as the word you are becomes a contraction, which is your, which is Y-O-U apostrophe R-E. So using that punctuation mark. And in medical writing, you need to decide whether you will use contractions or not, because sometimes contractions are not easy to translate into other writing, and some people may be unfamiliar with contractions as well. So this will depend on your audience, how many characters you have to use, because whether you use you are or your, there's a difference of at least one character there, because you're getting rid of the A and you're replacing it with an apostrophe, but you're also getting rid of a space as well between the U and the R. And if you are being formal or technical or informal, so if you're being more conversational, you might want to have more contractions. So you want to be a bit more casual and friendly with contractions. And you should always double check your grammar as well and the rules that your client wants you to follow. I also want to mention abbreviations and acronyms. So when you use an abbreviation or an acronym, always write it out in full, as they can vary according to the context. So if you are writing something like ED, that is an acronym for erectile dysfunction. So an acronym is when you use other letters to define a collection of words. An abbreviation is when you shorten a word. So, for example, an abbreviation could be schedule, which has been shortened to SCH, and an acronym is one such as erectile dysfunction, which has been shortened to just ED. So decide if you're going to capitalize each letter depending on the style as well. And even though it might look awkward to write erectile dysfunction every single time, if you decide to have them as capital letters every time, then just make that consistent. But generally, those words are not meant to have capital letters. So you can use your acronym as capital letters, but you do not need to have the actual words with capital letters as well. So I would say use a small e and a small d for erectile dysfunction, but you can use ED in capital letters as the acronym. And as a general rule, I would say write out the abbreviation or acronym in full every time you are under a new H2 heading. And this will save the person from scrolling through the page when they are reading. So by the time they get to the end of the piece of text, they might have forgotten what it is. So save them some time and they will appreciate the effort. So if you're going to use things like IE, EG, ETC, via, and/or, try to avoid them if you can. This makes your reading much easier. This makes your writing much easier to read. And I would say the reading experience is going to be a lot nicer if you write these out in full and say exactly what you mean. So try to avoid looking indecisive if you're using something like and/or, and try to avoid confusing the reader as well. So be sure about what you're talking about and avoid looking like you don't. Otherwise, the person is going to stop reading. And you can use connective words to carry the conversation as well. So things like, for example, and or through, and things like that. So I would also say, think about how quickly someone can get through the information, or if you're stopping them by including these kinds of words. Now, when you are writing, think about credible sources of information. So people ask me, how do you find a credible source of information? So first of all, look at the date of publication. So is it out of the date that you are looking for? So for example, when I was reviewing pages for nhs.uk, the website, I would have to look at evidence sources which are less than 3 years old, because that means they're more relevant to today. And they do a review of their content every 3 years to make sure that it's in date. Then think about who wrote it and who reviewed it, and also their qualifications. So was it written by a doctor or was it written by an undergraduate student? So I have had to check content which has been written by an undergraduate. Maybe they just found them on somewhere like Fiverr or Upwork, and then they just paid them a small amount of money to write it. And then I have to go and actually clinically accurately check it. So people cannot use that piece of information. They should not publish it because of the person's qualifications. They're just an undergraduate student. So ideally, things will be written by professors or doctors or nurses or pharmacists. So think about the qualification of the person who's written it, and also the qualification of the person who's reviewed it as well. So ideally, you'd have at least 2 people working on a piece of work or on a piece of writing. So also consider if the author or the reviewer is a real person. So have they written other things? Are they a subject matter expert, also known as an SME? So think about what their area of expertise is and if that is relevant. So would you have someone like a skin doctor or dermatologist write a content piece about the heart? That's probably not a good match. So if you are using a link or you're linking out to something that's not on your website, then the website should be secure as well. So you don't want to be directing people to a source of information which could put them at a digital or cybersecurity risk. And if you can, find badges from official societies or accreditation schemes that support the website as well. And think about the purpose of the writing. So I have been in situations where I was looking at writing on a charity website, and it was clear that they had represented the data in a way that was in their favor. So that definitely made them look very biased, and their kind of goal with the content is to get people to donate. So if they can make it sound worse than it is, then that's not a good look for the charity, but also it means that they're hoping people are not going to notice and they're going to make a donation because they think the information they presented is true. So do be critical of the information that you're looking at if you're going to use it as a source of information. Also think about plagiarism as well. So now in the age of AI, which is artificial intelligence, and people can generate content, then there aren't many ways that you can check if the content is plagiarized. So I would recommend trying to look at all of the other things I've mentioned and try to also search if that information has been reproduced somewhere else or if someone has taken it and copied it onto their website. So I have used the Grammarly plagiarism checker, but I'm not sure if it's still as accurate. So technology is kind of repeating things that have been produced in the past. And so generating content through AI is not great if you are producing health or medical content. And even if your client gives you something to use as a source, you should always check it yourself. So do not trust that your client has done their due diligence and checked for everything that I've just mentioned. So if you are going to reference an original piece of work, then make sure that you provide a citation. So the citation is a reference for the original source of information, and always ask the client how they want you to write the citation. So there are several styles, and I'd recommend that you ask them for examples of previous work where they've included references and cite how they've cited them. And this is really important because it gives your work credibility as well. And people want to be able to go to the original source to see if the original source actually matches the way that you've interpreted it for the piece of writing that you've produced. And some clients will want you to include a specific page number or write the date that you access the information. And they might want you to avoid linking to PDFs because PDFs are not really a page that is indexed on the internet. So that means it's quite difficult to search for them or find them. And then some PDFs can just be removed from websites, so the links no longer work in future. And maybe they want you to avoid including brackets or certain elements, and make sure that the source is from within a certain time frame. So as I mentioned before, maybe within the past 3 years. Now, when you're writing, editing is a really important part of writing, and you want to avoid writing and editing at the same time. So writing a sentence, then going back to edit it, because it's going to take you forever to write anything. So make sure that you just work on the first draft, just get it done, and then you can go back and edit and spend time refining it. And this is all part of the writing process. So writing is also thinking. So your first draft is never going to be your final draft, and it's so important to think of it that way. And you're also going to get feedback from other people. So that's going to mean that the piece of writing goes through several versions usually. And this is why it takes time to produce a good piece of writing. And there's no AI shortcut for that. So even if AI produces you a piece of writing, you still have to go through and edit it, and maybe several other people need to review it too. And so to keep that in mind. So it can be hard to even edit your own work, and it can feel embarrassing when somebody points out obvious mistakes. And I've experienced this, especially in the beginning. But don't take it personally. Nobody's perfect. And always be willing to take on feedback and learn as well. Try to leave a space, even 20 minutes of doing something else before you go and edit your work, or pass it on to someone else to allow them to read over it. And it's likely that they will notice things that you haven't. And pay attention to details. So I have had situations where I've been working with a freelancer and they've used the word milligram instead of microgram, and you know that there's a 1,000 times difference between those two terms, and that can be a critical piece of information. So do be careful with the small details, especially in healthcare. And also check that the right word has been used. So something that spell checkers and grammar checkers cannot do accurately some of the time is they will suggest things. I saw a LinkedIn post today where somebody said, I don't want to change the word an to bean, which is completely different meaning. So just be careful. Another example of that is conception and contraception. And I've picked that up in another writer's work in the past as well. So, they're missing TRA out of the second word makes the first word. So just really be careful with the words that you use, and also things like units such as microgram and milligram. Now, if you are proofreading your work, it means that the writing is done. And you want to also check for spelling mistakes, punctuation errors, and also if you've used the wrong word, like I said before, and writing for clarity and not to show off or sound smart. So a good piece of writing is going to communicate the information pretty comprehensively, concisely, and also make sure that the person gets the information that they need. So you're not going off on a tangent in a different direction with your writing. So try reading out loud as well, especially for conversational style writing. And this can include podcasts and video scripts as well. So again, nobody's perfect. You're only human. You're probably going to go through a few versions before the final piece is approved. And you need to kind of set your expectations for that and your timeline of work for that as well. And in medical writing, there will usually be an approval process which involves multiple people if that piece of writing is going to be around for a long time. So you usually want medically qualified people who know the rules and regulations as well of having that health information published. So, for example, there was a situation in the UK where you've got pharmacies who are producing information about prescription-only medicines, but actually those are considered adverts, and you are not allowed to advertise prescription-only medicines in the UK to the public. So they've got that information on their websites, and now there's a big regulatory issue with that. So make sure you know the rules. Otherwise, your piece of writing could be taken down or lead to a fine, or maybe your client getting in trouble. So here are some book recommendations. And these are things that I've got and I've read and I flick through. So How to Write Clearly by Tom Albrighton. Eats, Shoots and Leaves by Lynn Truss. 100 Ways to Improve Your Writing by Gary Provost, and Oxford Guide to Plain English. If you want, you can also do some further reading on these topics, so using the active voice versus the passive voice, nominalizations, which is when you mash up words to make different words that might not be needed. So, for example, when you say something has become digital, a nominalization could be the digitization. And so digitization is a very difficult word to say and read, and you should avoid nominalizations as much as possible. You should also have a look at marketing standards and regulations for healthcare in the region that you want to write for. So there'll be different rules in the UK versus the US versus Australia versus all the other countries and nations in the world. And also think about storytelling as well if creative writing is something that you are interested in. And I'll be creating some resources about storytelling in future as well. So now you can put your skills to good use, and you can create and also question briefs from your clients. Briefs might be incomplete or they haven't specified what they want in particular circumstances. So it's really important to get down into the detail with your client about exactly what they want, so you can also give them an accurate quote as to how much it's going to cost you to create that piece of writing and how it's going to be used. And also if you can even display it in your medical writing portfolio. So think about that. And think about the ideal person that they are going to be writing for, that they want you to write for. And if they use contractions, if they're okay with bullet points, do they use capital letters at the beginning of their bullet points, for example? And it's really worth taking the extra time to find out all of this information before you start writing, because otherwise you're going to come back with loads of feedback, and you want to avoid giving yourself all of that extra work if you can do it up front. So I would recommend that you build some kind of template or checklist for yourself with everything that you need to look for when you're going to start writing for a client. Now, I want to say thank you for watching. And if you want to learn more from me, or you want me to look at your writing and give you feedback, maybe you want to develop your skills in medical copywriting, which is my area of expertise. So that's more things like blog, social media writing, writing scripts for health videos, writing news articles, and writing for patients and the public. And then also maybe you want to learn about regulations in the UK. And I've also got a course on how to create a portfolio and how to learn more about search engine optimization as well. So I'll leave links to places where you can find all of those courses. And I do set you assignments and I give you feedback on all of your work. So you can actually learn from me as a teacher, and I'll also be helping you along the way with any questions that you have. So check out the courses in the video description box, and I hope to see you there. So well done for completing this course on medical writing skills for beginners. I really hope that you enjoyed it. And if you do have a minute to spare, please leave a comment underneath this video. Your feedback is very much appreciated. And thank you so much again for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.